on how to inspire our students to be creative activists.
A little over 3 years ago, I was teaching the American Civil Rights Movement, and I had, there we go. I had on my board this iconic photograph, 1963, the March on Washington, thousands of people demonstrating their patriotism. Martin Luther King Jr. about to take the steps of the Lincoln Memorial and exclaim his dream for what America can be. A student raised her hand and said, "Mrs. Staysniak, I wish activism like that was still present today." And my immediate reaction was, it is, it's all around us, how can you say that? And mind you, this was a little over 3 years ago, so this is before the Black Lives Matter movement began. This is before the most recent fervor surrounding the political election, which all you teachers can probably attest to, that students are feeling quite vocal about their opinions with this election. But within her remark was a very sincere sense of hopelessness. And in deciding how to best respond to her, I thought, how do I make her feel a sense of responsibility? How do I make her feel that she is part of activism, of achieving justice? How do I make her feel hope? I could tell her all of the amazing lives and stories of people who have devoted their lives to activism, who are devoting their lives to activism right now, or I could show her. With the initial support from Facing History and ourselves, I developed a project in which students would conduct interviews with people who have devoted their lives, currently in the past, to activism right here in Boston. And I applied and received a Margot Sternstrom Innovation Grant, which provided the funds for me to start Voices of Activism. My students would go out and conduct interviews. And we started with the Missionary Sisters of the Immaculate Conception, which are our group of sisters who live right on Mount Alvernia High School's campus. I thought that my students were super nervous about the first round of interviews, and I figured if we were going to get our feet wet, if they're going to make little mistakes here and there, I'd start them off with a pretty forgiving crowd. And from there, my students began to have really wonderful discussions in class. What are we curious about? What questions do we have? What systems are we curious about? And then we conducted research to find organizations right here in Boston that address those issues, that work to solve problems within society that have been met with activism. And we developed questions. What do we want to know? If we got to go to this organization, if we got to talk to these people, what do we want to ask them? And with the support of the most flexible school administration, I was actually able to take a small group of students out of school for either a morning or an afternoon, in one case on a school night, and using a set of school iPads, we conducted interviews and a free voice recording app on those iPads. Students sat down with people who work at these organizations in these groups, and they recorded those interviews. They learned more about their lives. In some cases, we also got to get our hands a little dirty, such as at Revision Urban Farm, in which after conducting interviews, we were able to help with their winter planting season. And although we were fortunate enough to conduct this project using iPads, a couple of times technology failed us, as technology sometimes does fail us, and we resorted to the basic tools of any interview, a pen and paper. And in one case, we had to re-record an entire interview using Skype, but we were able to get that audio some way, somehow. With the experience of the day, the interviews themselves, we then took it a step further. How do we share what we've done? We built a website. The website is called voicesofactivism.org. You can actually go to the website. You can read and learn more about every organization that we went to. You can listen to the audio from all of the interviews, as well as read a student reflection. How did she feel hearing this story? What is this person's story? And powerful quotations that she felt really summed up the main message of that interview. And at the end of every interview, no matter where we were, no matter what organization we were interviewing, we always ended with the same question. What is activism? And despite the fact that we were at a variety of different organizations that addressed a plethora of different societal issues, without fail, within every response, were themes of responsibility, themes of justice, and themes of hope. As my students unraveled these stories, these local stories, some other pretty amazing things began to happen. Now I know I got to take them out of school, but they had a lot of fun. And I know it wasn't just because they got to miss class. But by the end of this project, these students became like a little family, 11th and 12th graders who weren't necessarily friends beforehand. We had a lot of fun. I also found that whatever stereotypes, whatever misconceptions my students had about these workers or the populations they worked with, all of a sudden, those stereotypes, those barriers of judgment began to crumble. And instead, they were replaced with relationships based on empathy, understanding, as well as a deeper curiosity. I found that as my students learned more, they began to question more. Why is it that when we interviewed a group of ex-convicts who are transitioning back into society, why is it that legally we are not allowed to post those interviews online? Those questions is what I was unprepared for, but what, as a teacher, amazed me. On our last site visit of the first year doing this project, we went to a group called Prison and After, in which the girls got to interview workers at this group who work with men transitioning out of prison. And besides just conducting the interviews, we were able to eat a meal together. We formed a circle. We held hands. We prayed. And then we broke bread together. And this was a very transformative experience, not only for my students, but for myself as a teacher being witness to this encounter. And perhaps my students can say it a little better than me.
Everyday people participate in activism, and it's amazing to see how just normal people are speaking up for what they believe in and what is right. It put me in situations where I got to feel what other people feel and the emotions that and compassion that these people have to help one another.
I felt more of empathy than sympathy for them because I could feel with them when I got to talk with them and listen to their stories and know why they were struggling.
I got to know more about their struggles, and I didn't necessarily judge them or not know how they felt to some extent.
It broke barriers, and I liked how we got to pray and hold hands together before we ate because I felt very peaceful, and it was happy to be equal. It shows me that I need to be more courageous in order to stick up for my beliefs, and that it's okay to do that, and don't be afraid to do that because it actually makes a difference.
What started as a project, not only in response to my students' remark about activism today, but also a project very much grounded and rooted in developing and strengthening academic skills, conducting research, formulating questions, conducting an interview, listening, extracting important information, writing through reflection. All of those skills that developed and that main target, it turned into such a more powerful experience of building empathy among students in my classroom, in a history classroom. So what is activism? As my students and I discovered through doing Voices of Activism, activism is responsibility, it's justice, and activism is hope. Hope that one day things can change, and our voices will be the ones to change them. Thank you.
Well, thank you to all of our presenters.